Tonight, a secret operation shatters Miami's power circle. A $2 billion drug empire hidden behind luxury walls just got exposed.
No public awareness. Encrypted communications were monitored continuously. Server activity tracked between midnight and dawn. Internal authorization spikes mapped against hidden routing behavior. That was when analysts discovered the rhythm inside the network. The system operated in cycles. Weekly routing windows. Monthly approval surges. Quarterly identity resets. Everything automated with near-perfect precision. Then investigators located the hidden operational hub. A secure government processing facility outside Dallas, Texas. Officially inactive. Publicly abandoned. But internally. Still alive. Server traffic inside the building peaked between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. every morning. Authorization credentials rotated constantly. Oversight systems disconnected during high-volume routing windows. Massive encrypted data streams moved through isolated internal channels never intended for standard administrative processing. That was when federal command approved intervention. Not as a routine arrest operation, but as a coordinated federal takedown. Because by now investigators understood something critical. The system was layered. And removing one component would not stop the operation. At 3:11 a.m., movement began. No sirens. No media helicopters. No public warning. Just black federal vehicles moving silently through rain-covered access roads surrounding the inactive government complex. Within minutes, FBI and ICE tactical units secured the perimeter. Power isolation teams positioned near the main grid access points. Cybercrime response units prepared emergency containment protocols. Federal agents waited for final authorization. Then the command came through. Move. The breach happened fast. Steel entry tools shattered reinforced glass doors. Agents flooded the main corridors. Hallways secured immediately. Internal communications disabled. Network access isolated before emergency deletion systems could activate. Inside the facility, investigators found something shocking. The building was fully operational. Rows of blue-lit server racks stretched across underground processing levels. Massive wall-sized digital displays showed live authorization activity still moving through the system during the raid itself. Identity routing software continued processing approvals in real time. The operation was still active. Federal cyber teams immediately began imaging the servers before automated purge systems erased the infrastructure permanently. And what they found stunned investigators. Thousands of linked identity clusters. Automated authorization bypass systems. Biometric recycling structures. Live financial routing dashboards. Approval chains designed specifically to move identities through government systems without triggering oversight review. But the financial layer was even worse. The redirected funds were not simply disappearing. Portions were being routed into external criminal operations already under federal surveillance. Money laundering corridors. Interstate trafficking systems. Organized criminal financial networks operating across multiple states. The government infrastructure itself had become part of a much larger hidden financial ecosystem. And someone had spent years protecting it. Then investigators uncovered the discovery that changed the entire operation. Inside one secured server cluster was a secondary registry. Not transaction operators. Not system administrators. Protection layers. Names connected not to operating the network, but to shielding it from oversight. Compliance supervisors. Review coordinators. Authorization managers. Personnel specifically positioned to prevent investigations from reaching the core infrastructure. The corruption had survived because oversight itself had been compromised. By 6:22 a.m., the operation expanded nationally. Federal warrants activated simultaneously across 14 states. Additional processing hubs raided. Hundreds of financial accounts frozen. Millions in assets seized. Emergency audits launched across multiple administrative systems nationwide. For the first time in years, the hidden network stopped moving. But investigators understood the deeper damage would take years to fully uncover. Because this operation had not bypassed the system. It had embedded itself inside it. And as analysts reviewed the original authorization request that triggered everything, the one flagged at exactly 2:03 a.m., they discovered something deeply unsettling. It was not the largest anomaly. It was not the most sophisticated authorization sequence. It was simply the first request sent outside the normal routing window. A timing error. Only a few seconds off schedule. Enough for the monitoring system to notice. Enough to expose the pattern. Enough to unravel a hidden $11.3 billion corruption network operating across America. Which meant something even more disturbing. For years, the system had worked exactly as designed. And the only reason investigators ever discovered it was because somewhere inside the structure, someone made a mistake. And that raised one final question. If one small timing error exposed a hidden federal corruption network worth billions, how many others are still operating perfectly, without anyone noticing? At 2:03 a.m., a federal authorization monitoring system detected activity from a facility that officially did not exist anymore. The request itself was routine. A standard back-end approval sequence tied to federal beneficiary processing infrastructure. Nothing large. Nothing urgent. Nothing that should have triggered immediate concern. But the system flagged the authorization for one reason. Its origin point. According to government records, the facility responsible for the request had been shut down nearly 3 years earlier. Budget removed. Personnel reassigned. Operations terminated. On paper, the building was inactive. But inside the system, it was still running. At first, analysts assumed it was a delayed server response. Residual traffic from archived infrastructure. A ghost signal left behind after decommissioning. But when they checked the internal routing logs, the activity became impossible to explain away. The authorization was live. Current. And actively connected to multiple back-end processing systems across several states. That was when the monitoring division escalated the alert internally. No public notification. No press involvement. Just a small federal review unit assigned to determine why a dead facility was still processing approvals inside active government systems. When investigators reopened archived infrastructure records, they discovered something even stranger. The facility had not simply been abandoned. It had been erased. Staff records missing. Oversight files removed. Maintenance contracts terminated without replacement. Even the internal operational history had been fragmented across disconnected databases. It was as if someone had intentionally dismantled the paper trail while quietly leaving the infrastructure itself operational. And buried inside those fragmented records was a detail investigators could not ignore. The facility had previously been connected to a corruption investigation that collapsed 18 months earlier. A case involving structured financial movement, hidden authorization systems, and billions in redirected federal funds. At the time, investigators believed they were dealing with isolated fraud. But before they identified the core structure, the operation vanished. No arrests. No confirmed suspects. No operational hub. Eventually the investigation was sealed and archived. Until now. Because the authorization request that appeared at 2:03 a.m. matched the exact same routing behavior investigators had documented in the earlier case. Same timing intervals. Same layered approval structure. Same identity fragmentation sequence buried beneath legitimate processing activity. But this time, the execution was more refined. Cleaner. Faster. Whoever controlled the system had evolved it after the first investigation failed. Which meant the operation never ended. It adapted. The case was quietly reopened. Instead of tracing financial destinations, investigators focused on movement patterns. And almost immediately, hidden connections began surfacing. Authorization requests linked to shell contractors. Back-end processing vendors. Administrative consulting firms operating across 14 states. Individually, every entity appeared legitimate. Federal licenses active. Tax filings clean. Operational records verified. But together, the companies formed a hidden infrastructure operating quietly beneath public-facing government systems. And every routing layer led back to one central network. Texas. Weeks passed. The authorization requests continued. Small. Consistent. Perfectly structured. Nothing large enough to trigger emergency intervention. But collectively, the volume became impossible to ignore. Thousands of approvals moving through systems that technically should not have existed anymore. Then investigators discovered something deeply disturbing. The system was not just processing approvals. It was recycling identities. Federal analysts uncovered thousands of linked identity profiles spread across interconnected databases. Duplicate biometric markers. Repeated authorization signatures. Inactive beneficiaries suddenly reappearing inside active payment systems. Payments continuing years after official death records had already been entered. The same identities moved repeatedly through different administrative pathways as if the system itself was continuously reusing them. At first, investigators believed the issue was isolated data corruption. But the deeper they went, the clearer the truth became. This was not malfunction. It was design. The infrastructure had been engineered to recycle legitimate identity structures through hidden approval chains without triggering oversight systems. And someone with internal access was protecting it. By month 4, federal analysts identified abnormal beneficiary growth across multiple states. Some regions showed increases exceeding 20% despite no measurable population change. Other areas reported thousands of new approvals within a single fiscal cycle. The numbers made no sense. But the system approved them anyway. Quietly. Efficiently. Without resistance. Investigators now estimate the hidden network redirected more than $11.3 billion over several years. Funds originally intended for retirees, survivors, and disabled citizens dependent on federal assistance programs. Instead, enormous portions of that money disappeared into hidden financial corridors buried beneath legitimate infrastructure. And the deeper analysts went, the more dangerous the system became. Transaction routing software fragmented large financial movements into thousands of smaller transfers before redistributing them through layered contractor systems across multiple states. Automated authorization programs bypassed standard verification checkpoints. Audit logs disappeared during overnight processing windows. Oversight requests vanished before review teams could access them. The system was not hiding from oversight. It was controlling it. That realization changed the entire investigation. This was no longer financial fraud. This was infrastructure compromise. A hidden operational network embedded directly inside legitimate government systems. And if investigators moved too early, the entire structure could disappear overnight. So federal surveillance expanded quietly. No arrests. No warrants.